Just waiting a few moments for everyone to be logged in. Thank you for bearing with us for a few minutes. I know we started a little late, but we will begin very shortly. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Amplify Your Story, Environmental Justice, Storytelling, and Sharing. Our presenters today represent various community-based organizations and groups that work within the environmental justice sphere, and they will discuss their work in supporting environmental justice communities and helping to share their stories. For a primer on environmental justice, you can refer to various resources that we will share in the chat box. This webinar is supported by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's National Center for Environmental Health and Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. My name is Victoria Bortfeld, and I am the Program Manager of Environmental Health here at APHA. I identify as a white woman using the pronouns she, her, and was raised in the dominant culture. I will be your moderator for today's webinar, and I would like to review a few housekeeping items before we dive in. Firstly, please note that this webinar is being recorded, and this recorded video will be shared with all those who register. For today's webinar, video, microphones, and chat are disabled for attendees, but there will be a formalized Q&A session about 20 minutes long at the end of this webinar. To submit a question, please find the Q&A area located at the bottom of your screen. We will be monitoring this and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can during the Q&A session. Closed captioning services are provided, as well as Spanish interpretation services. Please access these at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Lastly, there will be a survey at the end of this webinar that we would appreciate you completing. And now I will introduce our speakers, who will each discuss their work in the environmental justice and storytelling space, after which we will have a moderated panel discussion and then time for audience Q&A. Our first speaker is Lucretia Daniels. Lucretia Berry Daniels holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from Michigan State University, as well as master's degrees in social work and public health from the University of Michigan. She has over 20 years of public health experience, with 15 of those being in progressively responsible leadership roles, where she has been responsible for developing, implementing, and evaluating efforts focused on eliminating some of the most stubborn health disparities. She currently serves as the executive director for Detroiters Working for Environmental Justice, where she sets the strategic direction for the organization. She is responsible for disrupting and dismantling the status quo that leads to Detroiters bearing the undue burden of environmental hazards that ultimately impact their quality of life. As the DC field organizer for Moms Clean Air Force from 2017 to 2019, Elizabeth Brandt fought the Trump administration's dismantling of the Clean Power Plan, championed the passage of the Clean Energy DC Act, and tirelessly advocated for clean air and children's health on Capitol Hill. As National Field Manager, she remains a fixture on the Hill while managing field staff across the US. Elizabeth's work has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, BBC America, The Hill, and now this. Before working for Moms Clean Air Force, Elizabeth grew up in the shadow of a copper smelter that covered her neighborhood with arsenic and other chemicals. She is determined to ensure that other families do not experience the devastating impacts that living close to underregulated industrial sites can cause. As a mother of 2 daughters, Elizabeth became increasingly concerned about the impact of climate change after the birth of our first child. Elizabeth holds a master's degree in social work. Dr. P. Kwazima Boston's belief in the family and the community, and in the community as a family, and working to make this concept live guides her movement work. She is concerned about health and well-being, and much of our activist work is in the movements for climate, food, and environmental justice. She uses art, culture, and tradition, youth leadership development, and community engagement and storytelling as ways to address these issues, to reach people and to get important messages across. She is co-founder of the Tallahassee Food Network, and their mission is to grow community-based good food systems that provide healthy, green, fair, and accessible food for all. She works with many alliances, coalitions, forums, and networks, and is a member of the Moving Forward Network, whose mission is to build power with communities to transform the global freight transportation system and advance environmental justice. She is dedicated to working with others to build a better people and a better world. She also connects and collaborates with people globally to build power for change and liberation. Her work is rooted with partnership in communities and people to collect shared real-to-life stories on the impacts and triumphs of inequity and strategies for getting free. She is involved in the National Environmental Policy Act campaign, the Shake Array movement, #Shake Array movement for Justice initiative to welcome spiritual energy into the movement, and the Creative Spirit Doll Story Collection, which are used to tell real-to-life stories of people. She teaches West African dance. She made a kayak. She has 2 children and 10 grandchildren. Family is important to her, so she spends a lot of time connecting with family members. Her motto is "Little by little, a bird builds its nest," and one of her favorite songs is by The Impressions, "Keep on Pushing." And lastly, we have Samara Almonte. Samara is part of the Michoacan diaspora, raised between the lakes and the Tierra Caliente regions of Michoacan and occupied Coast Salish territory or the Pacific Northwest. Samara identifies as Purepecha descendant, connecting with her ancestors, which has greatly influenced her work as a storyteller and urban planner. She grounds her work in a decolonial framework that uplifts Indigenous self-determination. Samara is the executive producer of Raíces Verdes and a 2018 to 2019 Doris Duke Conservation Scholars Program alumni from the University of Michigan. And now I'll hand it over to Dr. B. Kwazima first. Thank you for being here today, Dr. P.
Thank you Victoria, for those introductions of myself and the co-panelists, and it's an honor to be here with everyone. And I want to start by sharing a story that was told by a man named Mori Keba Kuyate, who is a storyteller, which we call a griot from West Africa. So could we go to the next slide?
Happy Kwanzaa, Aminata Traore. I would like to participate in your Kwanzaa program, but too bad I have to go to work. But your mom told me, so I say I'm gonna record this song to delegate to you, Aminata Traore, because you are a good daughter. You are true African. I've been hearing a lot of good things about you. You taking care of your mom very good, and continue to do that, because we are African. We don't depend on retirement. Our retirement is our kids. When we have kids, we don't worry about the retirement. When we get old, our kids are take over to take care of us. And that's what your kids is going to do to you too. Thank you very much. Wai kasima dima ona bentalu mina amina tarawari. Aminata, 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 Aminata. Kasima dima Aminata tarawari. Aminata tarawari. Kasima dima Aminata tarawari. Happy Kwanzaa, Aminata. Waya kasima dima Aminata tarawari. Aminata tarawari. Kasima dima Aminata tarawari. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. I start with that clip from Morikeba Kuyate because he is a storyteller. And it reminds us of the power of telling the story. Inside of the story, he talks about a young girl and her responsibility to her parents. And this story is a story that will live on because he actually sang the story. He used the kora to tell the story. So the storytelling for us at the Tallahassee Food Network has become a very powerful organizing tool, because when the story gets into a person, when a person hears the story, they tend, particularly real to life stories, they tend to remember the story and the message. I failed to share that I'm tuning in with you all from the land of the Tewa Nation in New Mexico, where we are meeting with a number of local environmental justice leaders. And all of us are sharing stories from the people that we work with so that we can see how we can interact and help each other, particularly in the area of fundraising. So there are some benefits of storytelling, and we at the Tallahassee Food Network use storytelling to inspire and to uplift the voices of our people. We use storytelling to share the lived experience from frontline, fence line people. And then we also use storytelling to build power, to heal, to uplift, and to engage community for change. Some of the examples that I want to share are, one, we use storytelling to engage community voices at public comment events. Another example is we use storytelling to manifest community solutions and ideas for strategic planning. Thirdly, we use storytelling to influence policy by helping our policy makers understand the experiences and joys and pains of the people that we serve in our communities. For example, like support to strengthen the National Environmental Policy Act. You can go to the next slide. So I like this quote by Joseph Campbell. I read a lot of his work. And he says that people forget facts, but they remember stories. And so understanding that, we use this storytelling technique or strategy to reach many and to help people to remember the stories, remember what's going on, and remember the experiences of people. Some who we want to be sure we reach, in terms of who do we want to reach, community members themselves, other community members, because we find that when we share stories with other community members, they can see some of the correlations between a story in one community and a story from a person in another community. And that helps us to build power. Two, we use storytelling to reach strategic planning leaders. When we engage with community members through our various activities, we always ask them, what is your dream? We always ask them, what's going on with you? We always ask them for ideas and thoughts about solving community problems. So it could be with climate change, environmental injustice, food insecurity, any of those topic areas. We also use storytelling to reach city, county, regional, state, national, and international policymakers. Policymakers are always strapped for time, so the story helps them to get the message quickly so that they can respond to community needs. We also use storytelling to reach our funders. For funding, storytelling can help them to quickly get a picture in their hearts and also as well as in their minds of community challenges and experiences, to feel the energy of the people and to respond to that need, not just based on the writing of the narrative, but also based on the spiritual connection that you get through a story. We can go to the next slide. So there's different ways to tell stories, and these are just some of the ways that we use in the Tallahassee Food Network. I'm sorry about that. Writing or our voices, writing the story down or sharing them with our actual voices when it fits. Using the stories from, we use stories, for example, we just had a big poverty summit. So to engage those folks that were in attendance, we used a number of stories. And one of the stories that we used was a story of a 65-year-old woman who lived in Leon County, Florida. And this woman recalled a time when she was a child where they didn't think about food or having enough food because food grew everywhere in the community. Fruit trees were everywhere. So when it was time to eat, they didn't have to run home to eat because they could just grab an orange or a kumquat or a fruit right in their own community. So food insecurity didn't always exist. So that's an example of a story that we told during a poverty summit. And the thing about that story is that there were so many people at the summit that could relate to that story. It pulled them in and it connected them to the topic that we were talking about. Another method is digital storytelling, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute. But that's a way of planning the story that you want to tell and then recording that story and placing the story with images that fit the narrative. And I'll show you one of those in a second. And another example of a method that we use to tell stories is called the #Shakere Movement for Justice. As you just saw with Morikeba Kuyate, the kora player, music can be used to galvanize spiritual energy. And I'll show you an example of that. And I always think that examples kind of give you a stronger picture of these strategies for storytelling. So I'll share some. And then finally, we use Prezis in social media. For example, with the Prezi, we're able to do creative reports to our funders in the Prezi format. And the nice thing about the Prezi format is that they're automated, so they move, they're action orientated. So they're able to really capture interest and attention of folks. And of course, social media, we use social media to share stories and to do storytelling as well. Could we go to that next? Yeah, and this is another example of a story that we told. Yes, that's one. Yeah, because I think I told this story. Thank you. Now, this is an example of digital storytelling. And we were trained in our organization to do this by some of our partners at one of the local academic institutions. So you can play this and we get an idea of what digital storytelling is like.
I'm remembering the song, I Need Love, Love to Ease My Mind by the Supremes. Papa's Got a Brand New Bag by James Brown. And I Can't Get Next to You by the Temptations. I'm remembering double Dutch jump rope on a hot summer day. The mothers, they all jumped double Dutch. That's how I knew them. By watching them with my mother and all us children jumping double Dutch together, singing, all in together, girls, it's very fine weather, girls, fire, fire, the teacher is for hire, January, February, March, and all the other months of the year. I'm remembering the neighborhood that I grew up in, on the ocean, in the beautiful area called Columbia Point. Surrounded by water on 3 sides, there was only one way in and one way out. There was no grocery store for miles, and if you didn't have a car then, it was difficult to make your groceries. I'm remembering people finding ways to feed the family, like my grandma, for instance, who grew up during the Depression and had to stand in a long line for food relief. She kept and stored extra food and toiletries in a hidden window closet. When we visited her, she sent us home with canned peas and corned beef. People find ways to feed the family. I'm remembering the food giveaways, sometimes at a church, a community organization, or a community center. There was a food giveaway every day of the week, and some folks seemed to know where to go each day. While waiting in long lines, mothers told exciting stories to each other about their children, their men, the new dance or record that came out that week. Oh, and yes, I'm remembering my home in the winter times. It would feel like a big party because my mom had a home-cooked meal that she offered to anyone who came by. People find ways to feed their families. Food brought us together as families, as friends, and community.
Thank you, Victoria. So yeah, that's an example of digital storytelling that can be used, that we use in our community organizing work to galvanize power, to build power. Again, like I said, stories get messages across quickly, and it also helps people to identify resilience, spaces of resilience, but also opportunities to collaborate and connect. This is an example of how we use social media to tell stories. And this is Xavier, who's telling his story about air pollution or air monitoring. You can start it, Victoria.
Hi, my name is Xavier Morris. I attended the Harambe House air monitoring training. It was great. I learned about the personal air pollution sensor. This is what it looked like. This is where you turn it on at. It measures PM to 0.5. PM means particulate matter. It can be in the air and it can cause bad health problems. Hi,
Yes, thank you, Victoria. So that's an example of utilizing storytelling with young people, utilizing social media, but also using it to build youth leaders. So in closing, I just want to share that there are other strategies that we use. We use photo voice, we use testimonies from folks, and we use these things that we call talkbacks, where people will share an issue and people will tell us, their experience with that issue. For us, at the Tallahassee Food Network, we use storytelling as a powerful tool in our environmental justice movement. Remember, I'm sure we all remember the truth and reconciliation processes in South Africa where they used storytelling. It was that mechanism that was used to help the society to heal and to engage and to move forward. And if I was going to, I think I have one more slide here, Victoria. Before you play that, I just want to wrap up the three main points that I want to convey here is one, that we use storytelling to inspire and to uplift the voices of our community. Two, that we use storytelling to share the lived experience of our frontline fence line community. Hashtag Shake Away Movement for Justice.
Look who joined the hashtag Shake Away Movement for Justice, Baba Olusegun. Educator, folklorist, historian, musician, storyteller, performer, lecturer, workshops for all ages at Pyramid Productions, Baba Olusegun. Ashe.
Thank you. Thank you, Victoria. I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Kwasma. Those were some great videos and examples of storytelling. So Dr. Kwasma might have to jump out early. So if you have any questions for her, you can put that in the Q&A and I'll make sure she'll get them. So next we'll have Lucretia.
Hello, thank you for having me. So excited to be part of this awesome panel and to talk a bit about DWEJ and what we do, how we involve the community in storytelling. I want to start off by saying when I was growing up, I was told by my aunts and grandparents that lie was a big word for a little girl. And so I was not allowed to say that someone lied. And so one euphemism that we were allowed to use instead of saying someone lied was that someone told a story. I assume others did that as well. And so as a child, if someone told a story, that basically meant that they had lied. One of the reasons storytelling is so important in environmental justice is so we can disrupt destructive and false narratives. So sometimes storytelling in justice spaces is a way to combat storytelling, if that makes sense. On that note, let me offer up a land acknowledgement. At DWJ, we would like to acknowledge that the land we stand on and the place that we call Detroit is land that was claimed by the United States through forced displacement and treaties negotiated in bad faith. We acknowledge the Anishinaabe people, which represent the Ottawa, Ojibwe, Wyandot, and Potawatomi. This understanding serves as a reminder of our ongoing efforts to recognize, reconcile, and restore the lands and water that we collectively benefit from today. So for the purpose of framing, let me offer up that storytelling is always about power. Because it's about making conscious decisions about whose perspective is important, who gets to tell the story, who's the villain, who's the hero, what they're fighting against and what is worth fighting for, what point of views will be included, what will be included and excluded from the story. How the story is told can shape or reshape the audience's understanding of reality. Storytelling for us when working with communities is about breaking silence. It is about, justice is about breaking silence. They're really both about making the perspective and the person that is too often unheard, heard. Storytelling can be visual. Dr. P gave really good examples of how it can be visual, like painting, photography, dance, or audio, like singing, spoken word, recited poetry. We encourage storytelling in various forms that are approachable and accessible for the storyteller as well as the audience. DWJ right now is engaged with a youth group of youth that are in grades 9 through 11 who have identified local EJ issues in their own communities and are producing visual and performance art to bring awareness to those issues, and perhaps even using some of their art to advocate for change. So some stories let us know sort of current state where we are. And then there are some stories that help us think about the future and where we'd like to go and really shed light on how we envision our future state. And that is part of what the youth are engaged in at this time. So I mentioned that they are looking at current EJ issues, and that's one portion of what they're doing. And the second portion of what they're doing is really looking at current state might be vacant lots and blight in their local community. But how could we then use these vacant lots in a way that suggests the type of future you would like to have for your community? And so really focused on current state as well as future state as the youth are engaging in storytelling through these various forms. Another way that DWJ has used storytelling is through our Solar Stories videos. So we spent 10 months working on Solar Stories of Detroit, a documentary project, which worked with local places of worship, residents, business owners, urban farmers, who were able to relay their story, their solar journey, in relatable and inspiring terms. And so they were able to explain how solar energy had a positive impact on their lives and the lives of the communities that they are part of. And it gave them opportunity to actually also take a moment to celebrate their accomplishments in the midst of, at the time, was a very challenging year of great human loss, uncertainty, transitions, and isolation. One of the reasons that this was really important in terms of getting the story out there is there were barriers in knowledge about the growing demand for solar energy in Detroit and what it really meant, the policies around 1% of rooftop solar potential citywide. And so there were a lot of other stories being told about whether there really would be access to solar power for residents and for businesses in Detroit. And so this documentary served as a way of others being able to see who has really done this work and who has been successful in doing it, and gave a real person to show this is someone in your community that you could reach out to that is telling their story of success with solar, and that this is something that you have access to as well. And so the goal really was to interview those community leaders citywide, ideally in person, but sometimes virtually, to have them talk about their journey in terms that were not technical terms, but really relatable terms that the general public could understand. And that is the goal as we are involved in storytelling at DWJ. It's really about having a way to connect at the heart and in a way that will inspire change and action among community members. One of the ways that that is happening as well, when we think about storytelling with the youth program, beyond their art installations that they will do, there's also an opportunity for spoken word from the audience. There's an opportunity for storytelling from the audience. And so it's not only those that have already sort of been given a voice to do this that can engage, but those that would like to participate, that come to the art show, are able to participate as well and be storytellers and become artists and to engage in ways that they typically would not engage. And so that is really the ways that we use storytelling to engage the community that are different than what Dr. P already illustrated. We do use storytelling as well for public comment, et cetera. We've had some success with that as well, and really helping the community understand better how their stories are relevant, how they can be heard and will be heard if they show up and raise their voices, and also helping to frame some of those stories in ways that, so there was some coaching involved, right? And how to frame a story for different audiences. I don't want to be redundant based on what Dr. P has already said. And so I think that my main takeaways really for the group would be, one is the importance of engaging youth in storytelling, and making sure that we recognize that it's not your mama's movement, right? It is not going to, youth are not going to engage in the ways that maybe some older folks would, and making sure, and Dr. P brought this up as well, that we are tapping into social media and recognizing that a lot of the ways they engage are visual, and a lot of the ways that they engage are in these really short stories. And so making sure that we're presenting those opportunities for youth to be engaged in ways that are approachable and accessible for them.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lucretia. We'll circle back to you to expand a little bit more with our question section. And we will hand it over to Elizabeth.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for sharing, Lucretia and Dr. P and Victoria, for making this all possible. I'm Liz. I'm with Moms Clean Air Force, and I just want to tell you a little bit of our perspective on how we can sort of use these stories to help people hear the facts better about air quality and climate change challenges. So yeah, this is actually a picture of my elementary school's electric bus. So that's a personal victory for me. And the next slide. So at Moms Clean Air Force, our mission is to protect children from air pollution and climate change, which are very connected. If you attack air pollution, you're also doing something to make climate change less of a problem as well. We envision a safe, stable, and equitable future where all children breathe clean air. In this picture, we have my good friend, our Colorado organizer, Shana Oliver, and her family. And Shana and I decided that this would be a good picture to show here because the core of storytelling starts with relationships. It starts with being in your community, telling your own story and listening to what other people have to say and helping people connect some of their experiences to pollution that they might be noticing or not noticing, but is impacting their health in the community. Moms also has the Eco Madres program, which focuses on sharing information in Spanish and in addressing environmental justice challenges in the Latinx community and empowering Latinx families with resources so that they can speak up and be heard as well. Moms also has resources that address particular challenges in the Indigenous communities in the United States that we've made in conjunction with the National Tribal Air Association, and some resources that also address the disproportionate impacts in Black communities as well. And I'll share those later on. But really the backbone of Moms is our 1 million plus members across the country and our vibrant network of state organizers who are out in their community trying to make change at every level. So next slide, please. So I'm Elizabeth Brandt. I'm a national field manager. I live in Maryland. I live on Nacotchtank, Anacostan, and Piscataway lands. And this is a picture of my hometown, Tacoma, Washington. This is not how it looks today if you go there. Tacoma is located on the unceded land of the Puyallup Nation. And I show you this because I wanted to tell you just a little bit of my story. I identify as a white woman. I have many privileges in my life. I use she, her pronouns. But I wanted to just share that many of us have these stories of pollution. And I can tell you about the smelter in this picture from a very scientific or historical perspective. But I think I just wanted to demonstrate for you, this is so much more engaging if you tell your own story. So for me, I always knew that we had this smelter that was actually decommissioned in 1986 and knocked down when I was a bit of an older kid. And I knew that we had pollution in our community, but it didn't mean very much to me. It just was kind of, you know, the aroma of Tacoma, a little bit of a joke to us maybe. But when I was in high school in civics, I was assigned to tackle a community issue. And just like any 17-year-old, I was looking for the easiest issue to deal with. And so I just decided that this tunnel in our neighborhood that had a sign on it, you can't ride your bike through here, you can't walk through here. I was going to go to the city and see, well, can we change that? Because it was very inconvenient to me as a 17-year-old on a bike. And I went to the city of Tacoma. They're like, oh, no, that's over in the town of Ruston. And the town of Ruston was actually, it's entirely within the city of Tacoma. It was set up by the factory or the smelter company because they didn't want to deal with the city government. So they made their own town, which is not all that unusual in, you know, these kinds of situations. So I go to the town of Ruston and I'm like, well, why can't I ride my bike through this tunnel? And they're like, well, you know, it's not that it's not lit. It's not that it's too narrow. It's actually, this tunnel is dripping toxic waste and we don't know exactly what's in it, but we know that the cars that go through there every day have, their paint comes off. Actually, the paint would peel on the cars. And it's within the Superfund project, the cleanup site. And so we don't have any jurisdiction to fix this either. And sure enough, I end up going down to the EPA Superfund site modular because there's no internet for this at the time, and learning that really in Tacoma, which has, you know, just an interesting history, but in Tacoma, because there was not enough money to do a proper cleanup, they had decided to only remediate the most contaminated land. And I'm not saying that was a bad choice, but yards like mine had very high levels of arsenic and weren't going to be remediated because there just wasn't money for it. And it involved moving whole vast quantities of land to a toxic waste landfill. So, I find that usually if I can frame a story in terms of my own experience, it's just more interesting. Hopefully stories bring us closer together. And the more you tell your own stories, the more you'll find that people have other stories to share as well. Next slide. So, one more back. There you go. So I just wanted to share, because this does come up a lot, that if you want to know more about how to acknowledge Indigenous lands, there are resources for that. And I just thought I would quick share that so that you can feel comfortable understanding what this is about and understand which land you live on. So you can go to that link. I'm sure we could put it in the chat as well, to learn what Indigenous land you live upon and why people think this is important. So land acknowledgement is important because we like to make sure that we're sparking reflection on our colonial history and of our communities. Next slide. I just wanted to show you some of the resources that we use at MOMS. And I really encourage you to find resources on public health that are in plain language, in appropriate languages. These are available in English and Spanish. There are a lot of other groups and sites that have really great resources, but I just offer these to you as one more resource for your arsenal as you're having these connections. Often what we need to do is connect our stories to our actual public health risks. And so that's really kind of what we aim our resources at being in plain language, understandable, and giving people the information that they need to know. So this is just one example of that. Next slide. And so, yes, this is my friend Shana Oliver, and she's an Indigenous rights advocate and our Colorado field organizer, as I mentioned, and she's going to tell you a little bit about the Suncor refinery in Detroit. Next slide.
In Navajo stories, we were brought here to protect the lands. That's a part of Indigenous cultures. Their first instructions was to protect Mother Earth. Air has always been revered as sacred. That's what gives us life, which is how we come to this crisis where we're at, where we need to protect that life source. Here in Colorado, the Suncor refinery, where it sits now, the community is predominantly Spanish speakers. It's low-income people that are Black, brown, immigrant. It's just between the highways. That's where people like myself and those people of color are pushed to live. Suncor refinery has been operating with an expired license for so long. When you go into these communities and speak to them, they say, yeah, I have brain cancer. I'm going through chemo. Or the neighbor is always running out of oxygen. My son's been just diagnosed with asthma. We're the sacrifice zones, and it's okay to harm us. My friend Lucy Molina has really pushed for change in Colorado, where we're speaking up about these things and pushing for climate action to reduce pollution.
This is my home, and as a mom, is why I stand up. We have a responsibility to protect our planet. It needs to begin in communities like ours that have been impacted with environmental racism and injustices.
Now we can start connecting the dots of the emissions and how the communities are being impacted with various illnesses. But Suncor continues to operate with expired permits. We get pushed into these areas where we don't have that same access to protection of the Clean Air Act. This hasn't been put forward on the agenda for the EPA, but we're hoping for that to change through leadership. What I'm doing is making a pathway for future Indigenous generations. I want them to be able to live in a safe community and be able to breathe clean air and to be free of all the health impacts that we are experiencing today. The air has no boundaries, and we need to hone in on what it means to be a shared community and what it means to thrive together.
Thank you. So some of the same faces you saw in that video, you can see in this photo. This was taken on Valentine's Day this last year. And these are advocates from Cultivando, which is a wonderful organization that we partner with in Denver, and Moms Clean Air Force. Shayna here is at the front of that picture. But what's special to me about this picture is that day, Shayna and Lori and our Colorado team brought Cultivando to their senator's office, to Senator Bennett's office. And they shared this story, and his staff helped us make a plan to help them find some continuing funding for air monitoring, which is something that we're still working on. But you want to use these stories and share them in your community, and also share them with lawmakers. So just sort of to recap, like, it's great to share on social media. Moms has a big presence. And one of the best things is when our members just to make like 15-second videos about what's important to them. We love that. And then, you know, as our advocates are growing in their voices, helping them to actually get those as letters to the editor, just because a lot of decision makers will see them, work up to op-eds, and meeting with lawmakers. It's intimidating to a lot of people, but if you bring in a mix of people who are experienced and people who are trying something new, you can get really wonderful results. And yeah, you know, attending hearings and rulemaking storytelling is so important, because people will hear, the staff listening in those kinds of settings hear the same sorts of things over and over, but if you make it personal, you're really going to be remembered. And I think that makes a much bigger impact. And, you know, as with the Suncor issue, you know, change takes time. We had a big win with the EPA rejecting a permit for that facility, but, you know, what that really means is we have to go back and do more and more rulemakings with the state of Colorado to actually fix the problem. So it just takes time. Next slide. And learn more. All of our resources are online, including if you're interested in the kinds of ways that we mix facts and stories in hearings. You can see a lot of example testimonies on our website. And I'd love your feedback. I'm here to learn. So if you have questions or you just want to talk, drop me a line. Thank you so much. Thank you all of you for listening and for being a part of this.
Thank you so much, Liz. Our last presenter will be Samara.
Hi everyone again. I'm Samara. I'm calling in from Muckleshoot and Duwamish territory, up in what is known as the Seattle area. And I'm really honored to be here, especially with the other presenters and panelists that, you know, definitely have a lot more experience and knowledge than me, and someone like Dr. P, who I would consider an elder now in this movement. And so it's really an honor to learn from you all. And so, yeah, I'll be talking a little bit about expanding environmental narratives and just kind of the way that I've been able to do some storytelling with different folks. Next slide, please. So Raíces Verdes, which translates to Green Roots, is a multimedia platform that I currently produce mostly by myself, in the sense that we're not a formalized collective. There's just like funding coming along now, but there is a team of folks that have helped me with different stages of it. And we are dedicated to validating, archiving, and sharing the experiences of BIPOC reconnecting with their green roots, sort of this concept that came about for me that is defined about our ancestral connection to the earth that embodies living and spiritual beings. So it can go beyond, like, you know, the earth, but also just our the ways that we connect with nature. And most recently, like within this year, because Raíces Verdes started in 2019, but in this year in particular, I kind of broke down the main 4 pillars that I found myself working through and storytelling over and over, which are self-determination, healing, reconnecting, and futures, which I'll expand in each of those and why they're important to storytelling in this particular field. Next slide, please. So how can storytelling be healing? You know, I think some of the examples that have been given already by the panelists definitely show some of that, but I'd like to share one that I did in particular. So next slide, please. So the Raíces Verdes originally started as a podcasting in terms of archiving and creating this library of storytelling. And one of the episodes that I did that you can find in, you can click the URL, I mean, the QR code right now if you wanted to. It will take you to the Spotify, but the podcast is also available basically anywhere you can listen to podcasts, like Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts and all that. But this one in particular, Slowing Down to the Beat of the Earth, was part of this bigger project in the time of healing, where there was different community organizers doing work around environmental justice. And, you know, like looking at the examples that the rest of the panelists shared, I'm usually the person behind the camera. I'm usually the person, you know, like interviewing someone for those kind of stories to happen, as you can see in this picture. And so in this case, I was documenting some of the stories of the other community organizers. And so Slowing Down to the Beat of the Earth is all of us talking about our water story, our connection to land, to the environment. And that is the kind of healing that I think can happen, like similar to what Dr. P, for example, was sharing, right? That with storytelling, we can create power, we can create a solidarity, we can create community. And as an Indigenous woman, many miles away from my Indigenous territory down in what's so-called Mexico now, the settler nation of Mexico, it's important for me, right, to find community and find solidarity in the diaspora. And so through something like this, of weaving literally our stories together into one single track, it was just really beautiful to see how everyone interprets water story. You know, there were folks that were talking about their baptism and how that was a connection to water and to the environment immediately. There were folks talking about also doing research around water quality where they grew up. And so I really recommend this. If I had to like show you one episode of the podcast, I would say this one really embodies the essence of like the work that I want to do, where we weave multiple stories. There's Black folks, Native folks in this particular track. And then the video part hasn't been released, but as I was also collecting the audio, there was also a video component to it. And so I definitely hope to share that in the near future. And, you know, the idea with like the title Slowing Down to the Beat of the Earth is that, again, with healing, with BIPOC, we have so much trauma sometimes associated with the environment and our relationship to the environment, because it's been disrupted, right? Through capitalism, through forced enslavement, through migration, through the theft of our land, like so many ways that our relationship to land and to the environment has been disrupted. And so when we get the time to slow down, whether it's, you know, outside in nature or even in your own home, and like being able to listen and tune into these stories, you know, that can be part of the healing, because we deserve to have a healing relationship with nature and a relationship that's centered around love and joy and not trauma. Next slide, please. And so the other part that I think this is where I'm currently at, like at the pinnacle, is storytelling to reconnect with ancestral knowledge. And so I think this one in particular, you know, touches on the point that a lot of folks brought up, especially Lucretia, about connecting with youth, is that youth are going to be the next storytellers, the next knowledge holders, right, of our Indigenous knowledge. And when I say Indigenous, I hope it comes across that I also include our Black relatives that are part of the Indigenous diaspora, right? And like all other folks across the globe, not just like Indigenous in the way that sometimes here in the North America it's considered, right? Because at least for my community, for example, we don't do tribal enrollment. We don't do like all these different systems that have been set in place in terms of identifying as Indigenous. It's much more about relationship. And so, yeah, so storytelling to reconnect with ancestral knowledge. I found that this is the core of what the work I'm trying to do with storytelling, because again, so much of our languages, like our Indigenous languages, have been lost or have been, you know, tried to be erased through this cultural genocide. And in that like native language is where we have ecological knowledge, where we have knowledge about food, about medicine, about how the world used to be and how systems used to work, our spiritual knowledge that connects us to the earth. And so I think it's really, really important as part of the diaspora. And recently I had a conversation with another Indigenous woman who is from Bolivia, but is living out in the UK. And she told me the same thing, you know, like wherever you go, there's native land under our feet, as we were talking today. And so we have to defend territory, and like who benefits from me forgetting my story, who benefits from me not identifying as Indigenous, even when I'm living outside of territory. And we know who's going to benefit. It's like the white supremacy, right? The cultural genocide that they want us to forget these connections to the earth that makes us fight and be land defenders. And so with this storytelling of capturing our stories, I just simply start the podcast. You'll hear it in the podcast, especially. I'll ask people, the first question is to everyone, what is your green root? And the amount of answers I get, the different answers I get is so awesome, because everyone has a different connection to the environment, and everyone's connection matters because it weaves that, solidarity and power to the environment. Next slide, please. And then this part in particular has been thinking about self-determination and storytelling. I really accredit this value or this way of looking at storytelling through my teachers and mentors, especially Indigenous mentors, Simone and Eugenia, who are amazing documentarists down in Mexico, documenting Indigenous people. And for me, self-determination when it comes to storytelling, it means beyond representation in storytelling. I think I don't seek representation. I think when I started this project, maybe that was part of it, of seeking, like checking off a box. Okay, like we want Black voices, Indigenous voices in the environmental field or in environmental podcasting or environmental stories. But I think it's beyond that. It's about literally having people tell their own stories, like the example that Elizabeth just shared, right? Like, I think that is a perfect example of self-determination, because we have this like Navajo woman like telling her own story from her own lived experience, from her own words. And so kind of, I saw a question already in the Q&A of like, how do we like support Indigenous communities? It's through self-determination, and self-determination will require land back, will require to be owners of our own history, of our own artifacts, like things like from museums, right? Like taking back those items so that we can have storytelling in our own terms. And so I think this is the really key part for liberation and for storytelling to be liberation, like in a form of liberation, is the self-determination that we get to decide our stories and that they're no longer centered around trauma and scarcity mentality, but rather the abundance of the knowledge that still exists and what the future can look like. Next slide, please. And so just some quick examples of like work that I've done. I'm not going to play clips, but at the end I'll have the QR code that can lead you to where you can find all of this. So one was Feeding the Spirit that I did on my own, and that one was where I documented 5 in total collectives here in Seattle that some were already pre-existing before the pandemic, some came through the pandemic, of trying to give food, specifically like fresh produce, organic produce, to BIPOC that were struggling with food insecurity, or it increased during the pandemic. And so I think this is a form of self-determination, because again, I really just was there to facilitate these stories and to show how all of them said the exact same thing when I asked, like, what do we need as BIPOC here in Seattle for self-determination to survive this food scarcity? And everyone said, we need land. We need land to grow food. We need land. And then this other one, Alimentando el Pueblo, is one of the original organizations on Feeding the Spirit. Then later, Alimentando el Pueblo reached out, and they're this Latinx food bank that came out again of the pandemic to give out food boxes for families, specifically Latinx families, because they cater those boxes. So they had like a Mexican box where it had all these like cultural relevant foods for Mexican families, and they had a Central American box and a Caribbean box, where again, we're Latin America, we're all actually very, very different. And that's a whole nother conversation about Latinidad, but we all require different food. And so it was important for her to showcase how, in this video in particular, there's just stories from different communities that have received these boxes, and they all talk about the same thing. Like, this has been transformative to have this food bank that gives us food that's actually meant to sustain us culturally and spiritually, not just like, nutrition. And so that was like really powerful to be part of that story as well. And then last slide, or next slide. And so then the last pillar, of course, futurism and storytelling. Like, who are we telling these stories for? And we can actually already go to the next slide. And so an example of this is this documentary that I'm part of, Expedition Reclamation, through the Brave Space Media. I didn't help produce this. I was just a character in this one. But it's basically 12 women of color talking about our experience with the outdoors and how do we connect to nature, which is a very simplistic way to put it. I would watch the trailer if you go to the QR code. But what I realized going through this experience is that all of us were really talking to both our inner child that felt excluded from the outdoors and they felt excluded from connecting to nature, and to our future generation. Some of them are already mothers, and so they're talking specifically to their daughters of color, right? And like the kind of legacy that they want to leave and the kind of healing and relationship they want to have their daughters have to the environment. Sorry, they're like mowing the lawn outside. And then yeah, and so I think, again, future is like we're doing everything for the youth at the end of the day. And who are we leaving these stories behind for, and that they should find these seeds. And so then last slide. And so, yeah, as I mentioned, you can find like the videos that I produce are all under 20 minutes. So they're pretty short. And then this one from Base Space, you know, they have a trailer out, but you can still book like screenings. And then I've been part of some of the panel where you get to talk to some of the film characters and hear more about why we decided to be part of this storytelling that, again, is very rooted in self-determination and in liberation. And so there's a couple links here. Again, if you just use the QR code, it'll take you to the main website, and then you can go from there to other links. But on Instagram, and then, like I said, you can find the podcast in a couple of different spaces. If you want to just support with some donations, there's Ko-fi. And then I do want to say I've been going through my own healing process in the last year and lost a close family member. So there hasn't been as much content being released recently, but it's still there. And I know that this is definitely my purpose. And I'm just excited to be in spaces like this where I can get inspired on different ways that we can continue doing storytelling, because it is absolutely vital for liberation, and not for ours, but also for the Earth's liberation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samara. And I'll give a shameless plug for the podcast. I've listened to it. It's great. So definitely we'll be posting these slides later, so you'll get the QR code if you didn't have time as well. And everybody else's slides will be posted too, as well as once we do that, we can get you some contact information as well. So we are moving into a little bit of our last 20 minutes or so. So we're going to kind of combine our panel discussion and Q&A. So we'll kind of do a round robin, if you will, for asking our panel members. And as I mentioned, Dr. Boston had to run. So you can send me any of your questions. I'll give my contact information, and I'll also, when those slides are posted, provide hers as well. So let's move into our question and answer section. So many of you, just in telling us about your work and giving our examples, showed the ways that you meaningfully and respectfully uplift community stories and narratives. And so I'm wondering, how can we encourage and create a comfortable space for community members to share their stories? So how do you even build that connection to the communities you've included in your storytelling? What is key to include or consider when you first even begin that process of engagement? Let's turn it over to Elizabeth first.
Yeah, that's a great question, of course. So, I mean, I think I can't wait to hear everybody else's perspectives on this too. But from my perspective, the most important thing is to show up, to listen, and not to say much, and just to keep showing up and listening, and not trying to get people to share with you if they don't want to, if they're not ready. You know, you can offer the resources. There's a church in my community that I have engaged with, and it's like I actually go to the church and I just leave resources as appropriate as people have said they want in the back of the church, and I'm waiting for people to talk to me. And that's kind of the basis for me of that. But then also just, there's nothing like a cup of coffee for engaging people and making a connection and maybe starting to have a little exchange of ideas. So I find, showing up with whatever food or drink people seem to want to share and being consistent is the most important thing.
Thank you. Samara, Lucretia, anything to add?
Yeah, I think one, in the practical sense, kind of going off with the food and drinks thing, like definitely paying folks if you're able to, and being transparent about whether you can or not, even if it's a small stipend, like a gift card of like $25 or whatever. I think, again, people's time and knowledge should be seen as, expertise and as important. So definitely paying if you can for storytelling. And then two, I would say that really being honest with yourself before you go into that. I think about myself behind the camera, like, why am I doing this? Like, if I am trying to make my big, and I had an experience with this where I was with another storyteller or like a producer that you could definitely tell was just doing, she saw like the check of when we were going to get to this video, right? And for me, I always see my role as like community organizer, as community uplifter when I'm behind the camera, not just as a producer that's trying to like make it big or make a name for myself as like a video production or podcaster. And so I think being honest with your intentions of like, what is your reasoning for documenting these stories? And again, the self-determination part comes in for me. Like, it's really about centering that person and how they want to tell their story. And then might look like you might have an agenda of like, oh, I'm just going to do the interview for 1 hour and you're there for 3 hours. Like that's happened to me a lot, especially with Native elders. We don't believe linear time. We're just like in the circular motion of telling stories, and you just have to run with it because that is their form of storytelling. And then later, for practical reasons, you can figure out what you cut out or whatnot. But I think just understanding that storytelling is going to look different, especially if you were tend to raised in like the mainstream form of whiteness. It can be such a rush process to do things, but with storytelling, it's going to take time to build a relationship and to get the story as well.
So yeah, I agree. So that relationship building is key, and making sure that you're an invited guest can go a really long way. And I get that sometimes we have, as organizations, have priorities, as we have funding for certain things, and we have specific goals, but recognizing that the relationship is going to be what matters. And so the stronger that relationship, the more trust that is built, is what's going to be important. And I just want to reiterate honoring folks' wisdom and making sure that you are offering payment for their expertise, similar to how you would offer payment for other expertise. And so as you're seeking out their wisdom and their knowledge and their stories, making sure that you're honoring that with some type of exchange that will be suitable for them. I would also say asking the question of the group that you're approaching. So the same question you're sort of asking us, like, how could this be successful? Then asking that question and just being very transparent, and listening to what that answer is, and then doing what you can to meet what their needs are and what their goals are as well would be really important.
Thank you all for your responses. It's really helpful to hear. So I have a bit of a difficult question for you. It's one that I think I struggle myself with, a lot of environmental organizations struggle with. But so we're talking about environmental justice issues, and sometimes when we're getting into the science and saying what exactly affects your health, and we were talking about PM 2.5 earlier. Sometimes it's difficult to explain the science while avoiding heavy jargon, if you will. So how can we in this space successfully and effectively communicate this to a public audience in a way that is relatable and digestible, if you will? And on that, while communicating this information, how can we ensure that our messaging is culturally competent, linguistically accessible, and inclusive in those ways? Samara, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I think trying a lot of different mediums is always good. I think like I've done a couple workshops specifically with youth recently on like storytelling, and we've really talked about the idea of like zines. Which if you're not familiar with, the zine is just, like a small little booklet. It can sometimes be like pocket size, or it can be like regular 8x5. And really thinking about adding a mix of like visuals, like images, or like charts, even like graphs, and then also some facts. So I think just exploring with different mediums. I think again, podcasting has now sort of gone like a funny like stereotype of like, oh, like another podcast, because like everyone wants to do a podcast, and it actually is really easy, y'all, and it's like really inexpensive to do one. Like Spotify doesn't charge you or anything to upload your content, which again is why we also get a lot of mediocre content. But I do think it's an awesome format because it's so accessible. Like most folks now have some sort of access to podcasts, whether against like Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Sometimes it even comes with your phone, right, already installed. And so I think exploring more of that audio and like video component to explain some of these terms, I think is a lot simpler. Also, unfortunately, we live in a society where like, we're constantly like commuting, or we're constantly like in these like spaces where you don't have the time to sit and read something. So I think something like a podcast and like we're listening to a video it's something you can do while you're cooking, while you're like driving. I listen to some of my podcasts when I have to commute to work and things like that. And so I'm really a proponent of like audio storytelling. Obviously that is kind of my background, but I do think it can be really effective just because, and like, you know, it's exactly like the examples that the panelists shared today with like short videos. Like, again, they're short, but I feel like I learned so much in just like the very short clips that we shared today, you know? And so it doesn't have to be like this 2-hour production of a documentary. It can really be, I can't remember if it was, maybe it was Elizabeth who shared, you know, sometimes they do these quick 15-minute like videos at the end of how like they felt about something. So again, I think just not being afraid of exploring, and it doesn't need to be high def or anything like that. It's really just about collecting the data or sharing the data in that way.
So I'm assuming you're coming to me next, Victoria. And I want to thank you in advance for not picking me first, because this is a very challenging question. And so just to add to what Samara said, connecting EJ, and we're thinking about storytelling, right? And so it's someone's reality and its experiences. And so connecting it to harms. So what is it that you're actually experiencing from what's happening in your environment? So the things that you taste and hear and breathe, and right now we just had some more rain, and thinking about the, you know, extreme flooding that has been in Detroit lately, you know, things that you're wading through. And so really connecting it to the harms, I have found in community conversations, make it more real and make it like, oh, that's what you meant by environmental justice, right? That thing that I'm actually experiencing is what you're talking about, right? So how do I experience PM 2.5? Or how do I experience, you know, a bad air day? What does that mean for me, my family, my community, our health and well-being?
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. And I think I can put in a Q&A one resource just as an example of one way that we can, or that people can work with collaborators to make sure we're really hitting the right notes in terms of who we're reaching and what the message is, and how we're really doing that. You know, Moms worked with the National Tribal Air Association to create a resource, Indigenous People and Air Pollution in the US, because our two organizations had realized that there wasn't really one good catch-all that just sort of summarized, well, what does this really mean for people who are Indigenous people living in cities, or people who are living on tribal lands who are Indigenous people, for their health, all of these air quality problems. So we made one resource together over several months. And, you know, it's interesting. It's different from some of our other moms resources, because through collaborating, NTAA is run by an executive committee of tribal representatives from across the US. And with so much input, it just grew a little bit. So it's a little wordier than some of our other resources, but like, that's fine. You know, that's what people agreed on. It was approved by their executive committee. It was approved by the moms leadership. But, you know, you just have to know it's going to take some time and some money. And we talked a little bit about translation. I mean, a lot of our resources, including that one, are available in Spanish, you know, and we've also been working with a Dene Navajo translator as well. And it's just taking time. So, you know, it'll be ready when it's ready. I'm not really sure where we're at with the budget, but, you know, you just kind of, I think sometimes our timeframes or our tight expectations for how long something is going to be or what, just get in the way. So if you can give a little space and grace for the process and make sure you have good collaborators who can bring a lot of different views, I think that's important. I think the other thing I would say is, like, if you look at some of like the how oil and gas development impacts pregnancy, right? That was the resource I showed a picture of in my presentation. Like, it's very visual. If you can invest in good graphic design, I think it pays dividends. But it's also very focused on, you know, if I am a pregnant person, what is it that I am experiencing? Because those are very serious impacts, but they're kind of hard for people to understand, all of these things around the birth weight and this and that. So yes, focusing, just like Laprecia mentioned, on the most serious impacts and putting them sort of right out there in a good visual way, I think goes a long way. I think that's it.
Great, thank you. So I think with each of your examples that you gave and with our discussion, you talked about kind of different target audiences that you would want to reach with your storytelling, with your narratives. We talked about community members, but I think there's also another side to this with the action component, with who you want to bring to action, and that could be policymakers, for example. So I'm wondering, in your own work, how have you created or distinguished different messaging or issue framing strategies to resonate with those specific target audiences? Where does that diverge? Is there something specific way of communication you target towards policymakers versus community members? What are your strategies in that way? I saw you nodding, Elizabeth, so I'm going to go to you again first, if that's okay.
So strategies for engaging decision makers. I mean, I think the first thing is knowing who you need to talk to, right? And so, you know, the Suncor refinery that we showed in that video, it was a little bit different for us. Our work in Colorado was more focused on other issues, right? Like the methane, oil and gas rules in Colorado are a big thing for us. But it just became something that we heard more and more from the community about. And so, you know, if you don't know who's in charge of something, you have to just ask until you find that information, right? I mean, and that can be calling your local EPA office and bothering people. That can be, you know, calling the university or somebody who is a lawmaker. If you really don't know what to do, honestly, a member of Congress, their staff has a lot of power to help you and a lot of reason to, you know, they work for you. And so I think those are really important things to do. And then I just encourage people to go as often as they can, even if they feel like they don't have something to say. You know, like one of my 17-year-old neighbors has been accompanying me a lot this summer, and we got to talk with our congressman just recently, and she would have said she didn't have anything to say with her, but just she's picked up so many facts that really, when she was there in the moment, she had the confidence to ask a question about pollution. And I thought that was like a really cool step forward. So I think just encouraging people who may even feel like they don't have much to say to just come. And if they feel so moved, they can share. It's a good way to do it.
LaPrisha or Samara, anything to add?
Sure, I can chime in. We don't use a different strategy. It's storytelling, and it's from your heart, and it's the message that you want to get across. And when community members engage in that way, we part of the liberation for them is doing that in a way where they're comfortable. We may coach around, you only have this much time, you know, to make public comment in front of the city council. But we really let them do that the way that they think is best for them to get their message across. And that can sound very different at different times, but we really, the audience does not matter. We want the passion to come through. We want their message to come through. Now, for staff, that's different, right? But when we're talking about a story being told by a community member to other community members or to legislators, we really don't have a different approach.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And I'll just add like a video recently that I was part of was around the COVID vaccine and trying to talk about like why some of the Latinx community here in like South Seattle wasn't getting like their COVID vaccine and their booster, and trying to encourage them with stories like of how they should get the vaccine. And I was a little nervous because I was like, oh, like what if someone says something super problematic? And it's like, no, like I didn't want to get it and I want to get it. Like I'm trustful of it. But it ended up being amazing. Like we should say, just letting the community do it. And they had some, you know, powerful stories of like some people were honest and were like, you know, I was really skeptical of the vaccine, but then I got sick because I got the vaccine because X, Y, and Z. And so I think just allowing for community to flow their own story and their own truth, like I don't think you can ever compete with that. So yeah.
Thank you for that. So all of you, I think, talked a little bit about youth activism. So we got a great question from the audience about youth activism and some suggestions that may you have. that you may have. So the question is, starting with, some research has suggested passive social media activism, like and share, for example, replacing grassroots activism. So the question is wondering if you have suggestions on how to support a higher level of activism, especially for youth, beyond this like and share.
So in case, I don't know if people can see the response I put in there, but I just added like validating the youth have the power to be storytellers themselves. I mean, my dream, and if anyone out there has the resources to support this dream, my dream would be that Raíces Verdes can do like a youth internship where like I would just hand over the camera, the podcasting equipment to a young person and be like, okay, like what is it that you want to talk about in terms of environmental justice, like whatever topic in particular, like I'll just be there to help you, like put together the first draft of a podcast series, the first draft of a documentary, a video, whatever you want to do. Like I really think like youth can create that content that we're seeing right now on social media, can create these videos, and because they are the next storytellers. And so I think finding ways to give youth the resources to like the physical resources of a camera, of a mic, of they're a lot more tech savvy than us, honestly. So they'll probably be like going way forward than that. TikTok, again, it might seem silly, but youth are creating some amazing content on there in terms of education. And so I think just like validating that like part of them, and not like, I don't know if, like how I feel about this passive activism, because to me it's still activism, right? Like they're still trying to be engaged with their social world. And let's be honest, like youth are very marginalized in our society. Like they are not given like enough resources and enough of a platform. So if social media is going to be their platform, then let it be, and just, you know, support that and encourage that kind of storytelling, in my opinion.
I would agree with Samara, and especially the idea of passive activism. So I said earlier, like, this is not your mama's movement, right? So it just looks different than maybe what we're used to. When we've engaged youth, and so there's going to be a rally, and we know youth are probably not going to show up for this rally, but there's an opportunity to make signs and make posters, and that's the way they engage. So that's almost like a like, right? Or right. So it's a way of engaging in ways that they're comfortable, and ways that they feel they have the capacity and resources. But the other piece is seeing similar others. It's the same as other folks get involved in activism. If you don't see other youth involved or folks that look like you, that you feel connected to, then you're less likely to get involved. And I think we do have to be careful about mapping on our ideas of what raising your voice looks like, what activism looks like, what is significant engagement. So if we are doing that, then that's going to come across and make it less likely that they're engaged, because I'm not meeting the bar that you're setting for engagement, then I'm not going to necessarily engage. So I think we have to be careful about that when we're interacting and we're talking about youth.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of what was just shared. And I think, you know, building from liking on social media to signing a petition on social media, or to making your own 5-second video thanking your lawmaker for voting for something that's important to you. You know, if I see that youth have done that, or done that with a parent or whatever, I make a point of sending it to like a lawmaker, like tagging a lawmaker, just so they get a little more validation, or like putting it on our national social media so they can see they're getting a broader audience by doing this. I think you want to have that kind of reinforcement the best you can. And also, you know, just making sure that, you know, if we're inviting youth, and I do a lot of activism, particularly with younger kids, but I always have teenagers with me too, you know, making sure that there is food. You know, like the worst thing you can do is show up and not have any sandwiches for an EPA hearing, you know. But I'll tell you, in my experience, sometimes getting kids to a thing, or to seeing that it's important to go to a thing, is like the biggest barrier. But like when I take kids to Congress, every time they are blown away, right? Or the EPA, like you get to stand at this big desk and get, you know, you get to talk to these lawmakers. Like it's intimidating, yes, but it can build your confidence. So I just encourage people, you know, if you have young people in your life, to include them in what you're doing, and to find more ways to, you know, engage in, you know, even just a personal capacity with the youth that, you know, I mean, my neighbor probably wouldn't do this stuff, except she knows me and she's willing to go down there with me and learn about this and share her voice. I think that's true for all of us. We can all, be a good example. And I always offer to write kids recommendations. Some kids aren't thinking about that, some are, but I'm here as a resource for you if you need to get a job or you need to go to college or whatever it is. I'm here to support that.
Thank you. Thank you all. So it is 4:30. I'm going to ask a closing question and ask if our panelists could keep their comments brief, but please use it to make any final points if you will. But we had a question that I think is a great ending note about moving the storytelling to action. So in addition to inspiring, uplifting, sharing, and engaging the community, how do you think storytelling can be utilized to enact change beyond communicating issues and information?
I think for me in the past, I think for me in the last couple years, it's just been, there's so much, especially with climate change, there's so much doomsday type of narratives. And I can't engage with that. Like, we can build a different future. There is a future that is where Black people, Indigenous people, and for a priority, like live in liberation, live in sovereignty, live in self-determination. And we have to imagine that. We have to imagine it so that we can build it, that we can, because, I think we're so fast to be like, yes, let's dismantle like capitalism and patriarchy and all these things that cause like climate change. But how much are we investing in the building? How much are we investing in the community building and the imagination, the radical imagination of what's going to happen after we dismantle these things, right? Like, there has to be something else that's going to come out of that. And I think storytelling has that power of imagining a new future that we're like walking towards, that we're, moving forward towards. And so I think that's why I do storytelling. And I think it builds action because someone else will see it and be inspired and know that a different world is possible. Thank you again for letting me be part of this panel.
So I have a really concrete example. So I mentioned that we're working with youth, this protest art program. And as part of their showcase, one of the things they would like to do is hang this vacant sign, and then they have photographs of areas in Detroit that are vacant. So vacant lots, closed down schools, closed down libraries. And then they wanted a suggestions box. And they wanted a notepad, and they wanted folks to write, what could we do with this space instead? And so it's a way of, the photographs are their storytelling, right? And then a way for those that are viewing that to engage in sort of this future thinking. Someone suggested, which was not a youth, but one of the activists that's been working with the youth, suggested also providing resources about, are there meetings about land use that are coming up, right? Are there meetings about school, these mothballed schools that are coming up, and making sure that folks also have resources. So it's tying in that storytelling with sort of future thinking and activism. So that's a really concrete example of how that could work.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. And I just feel too, like when we share stories, we learn more about ourselves. Hopefully we gain confidence. And the best thing that can come from that is growing in your own leadership, right? So as we encourage people to share stories, I mean, I love that within the Moms Network, we have moms who have become city council members, or, are on the solid waste board, or, are making those zoning decisions, or, are running for Congress, and so to me, telling a story is definitely about making changes, right? There are very important climate and air quality changes that must be made, absolutely, and we're trying to make them. But it's also about finding out what strengths you have you didn't know, and how you can use those to better serve your community, I think, too. And thank you all for sharing your expertise. And I'd love to hear from anybody in the group. Email me, I'd love to be in touch. Thank you all.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. I think this was a really wonderful conversation, and thanks to all who stayed over for a little bit. And I think these presentations and the discussion was really informative and helpful. And thank you all for who joined today and for providing your thoughtful questions as well. So again, the recording and slides will be available later this week, and this will include some contact information of our speakers and the resources that they shared as well. And please, if you can, complete the webinar survey, which you will be directed to shortly. Thank you so much for tuning in today. That concludes the webinar.